Oh, hello my friends, hope you are well. In the current golden age of miniature painting we find ourselves, it seems that nice glowy lighting effects are all the rage. And in today's video, I'll show a couple of beginner friendly ways you can add them to your own miniatures with a molten armor effect and a melty acidic goo effect.
Swamp Rip Miniatures.
So before we go straight into the painting, I've got some quick tips to help you lay a strong foundation and get the most out of your effect, with the first being the way you pose your miniatures. This probably sounds quite obvious, but you should choose a pose that's going to complement the type of effect you're going for when you build your miniatures, as this will help it all feel a lot more natural and like the damage is actually interacting with the miniature, rather than just being slapped onto a generic pose. The amount of time you invest into posing will almost always have a direct payoff onto the final product, and if you've watched any of my previous diorama builds, you'll have seen some of the different ways you can use green stuff and leftover miniature parts to give your regular old miniatures a much more dynamic look. But you can also use some subtle changes to help your pose sync up with the damage effects too. So for this guy, I'm going to be adding a big old melted plasma hole in his torso, and I've given him a few little adjustments, like tilting his upper body back ever so slightly, flailing each of his arms out, and pointing his head upwards into the air. Very subtle changes, but when they're all combined, this should give our Space Marine the appearance of having just been hit by some heavy weaponry a fraction of a second before he collapses onto the ground. For my second guy, I'm going to be adding a melty acid effect, like he's just been splashed with some spicy Xenos blood or mucus or other nondescript viscous alien fluids, and I wanted this to be corroding through his weaponry, with him looking at it in disbelief. So all I did here was tilt his hand with his palm facing up towards the sky, and then tilt the helmet so the eye slots are parallel with it. Again, two very small changes overall, but they've given our Space Marine a nice dynamic appearance. So yeah, think about what kind of damage you're going to be adding, then pose your miniatures in a way that will complement this. Next up, it's time to add the physical damage itself, and you can really do this in any way you like, but for our plasma damage guide, the easiest way to achieve a nice melty appearance is to actually just add a melty appearance. I use an old metal file for this, and all you need to do is heat it up with your wife's bougie scented candle, then once it's reached a suitable temperature, go ahead and shove that bad boy right into the miniature. You might need to do a couple of passes with this to get a really good melty look going, but I think the most important part here is leaving some nice gooey bits around the edges that will mimic the look of molten metal armor. Obviously, use some common sense to select and use your metal implements and heat sources so you don't end up burning yourself or inhaling melty plastic fumes. And if you're not completely happy with the look you got, you can use some green stuff to pad around the hole and build up the melted edges again. If you don't want to be melting your miniatures, you could make the initial hole with a hobby knife or something similar, and then again use some green stuff to make the melted edges effect around it, but I think the hot pokey stick makes it look way more realistic with way less effort. For the acidic melting effect, you can use some pliers or a hobby knife or whatever you have to remove a good portion of the armor or the weaponry you want to have melted away. I'm using a Dremel to speed up that process a bit, but it's really not necessarily. I just like whipping it out at every opportunity. Then once you're happy with the amount of material you've removed, it's time to build up the gooey acid effect, which I do by first gluing in the thinnest strands of wire I can find. I salvaged these from old scrap electronics, I think it was an Xbox controller or something, and once they've been trimmed to a good length, I cover them with some Uhu glue to thicken them out and give the impression of dissolved material glooping down. I use a little bit more green stuff on top here to add some extra melty texture, as the Uhu glue does dry quite smoothly. And now that our miniatures have been posed with the physical damage added, it's painting time. So for the molten armor effect, all you need is some fluorescent orange and yellow paints like these Vallejo ones, and some regular old white, black and brown colours. You can substitute the fluorescent paints for some regular ones if you like, but it's harder to get a really vibrant effect without them, so I definitely recommend picking some up if you can. The first step is to paint the area you're interested in with a white undercoat, and you need to get a really solid coverage with this, as any colours poking through can muddy up the fluorescent paints and make them look quite ugly, so apply a few coats if you need to. Then we're on to our fluorescent colours, starting with the yellow on its own first, which I paint over the entirety of the white we've just done, making sure to get it all the way into the hole. I like to then do a second layer where I mix the orange and the yellow fluorescence together, as the yellow on its own tends to have a slightly green hue to it, and this mixed layer will help to bring in a more typical kind of hot yellow colour like we'd expect to see. With this molten effect, the hottest parts would be inside the hole where the heat's still fresh and lingering, so we want to keep these areas a brighter yellow, then start applying our orange colour around the outer portions. The fluorescent paints are quite thin, so I like to do a first layer of the orange, kind of touching up to that inner yellow to create a bit of a transition, then let it dry and do a second layer of the orange focused around the outer edges only to help saturate them. When that's looking nice and bold, I do a layer of black followed by a layer of brown on the surrounding areas of the armor to kind of build up a scorched effect around the whole, tickling a tiny bit of this onto the outermost bits of the orange too. I then do a small mixture of my fluorescent orange and my brown color, using this to kind of blend the edges of the orange with those darker scorched colors. At this point, I'll then top up my orange once more to really blend the outer edges together and add some very subtle reflections. And this is a bit more intuitive, you have to just kind of put the paint where you think it's needed. But then to finish it all off, I'll just chuck on a little bit more yellow into the hole if it's not looking bright enough. And there we go. Easy peasy. So onto the acid. So this paint job is even easier, and all we'll need is some fluorescent yellow and green paints this time, as well as some white for the undercoat again. You can also use something like Tesseract Glow if you don't have fluorescence, it just won't look as vibrant. Again though, I just base coat everything in a solid layer of white to start with, and once that's dry, I do a layer of my fluorescent yellow. I give that time to dry, and then I come in with my green colour, which I apply to maybe 80% of the previous layer, focusing it towards the upper portions and leaving the brighter yellow colour towards the end of the droopy acidic drops to create some nice bright variation. It's way easier to build up the darker green over the yellow than trying to do it the other way around, so definitely work from your brighter colour to your darker colour here, and also chuck on a bit of the green to the immediate surrounding areas if you want some easy reflections. I tested one out with the Tesseract Glow on its own here too, and as you can see it did look pretty good when it dried, but it doesn't really hold up to the fluorescent paints in my opinion. So I think it's better than nothing, but I would still go with the fluorescence if you can. But yes, there we have it my friends, some pretty quick and easy ways for you to add a bit of extra spice to your miniatures, with the only real requirement being some fluorescent paints that you can pick up for a few pounds or dollars per tube. And honestly, I think you'll be surprised with what kind of effects you can make with these without a great deal of skill or effort. I mean, I'm an aggressively mediocre kind of painter, and these look pretty good, so if you're watching this, you'll definitely be able to do this, and you can probably make them look even better than I did. But anyway, let me know down below what you think of these effects. Let me know if you'll be trying them out, or if you think they're a pile of poo. And if you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe or leave a like so I can feel validation and stop crying so often. As always though, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya.